Greetings and welcome to the family. Greetings, family. Welcome to Three Docs and a Mic. This is Dr. Riaja Johnson, and I am here with my lovely sisters. Please introduce yourselves, ladies.
Greetings, all. I'm Dr. Komoia.
Hi, and I'm Dr. Saphronia.
And in this episode of Three Docs and a Mic, we are going to continue our discussion on Ghana. We got some great insights over the past few episodes. I learned so much about Ghana as well as history. So we appreciate you ladies sharing with our listening and viewing audience. So now we are moving on to discuss your time in Cape Coast. So please share with us your insights, any historical landmarks that you saw along the way.
So I'll just kick us off. Historical landmarks along the way, I'm not recalling. This was my second time actually visiting Cape Coast and visiting the slave dungeons at Cape Coast, as well as Lemon Grove is where we stayed, the hotel and the beaches. And so I can talk about just my experience visiting the slave dungeons, my first experience, and compare it to this past experience. And so when I first went, I was with a small group, and our small group was very mixed. And what I mean by mixed, we had folks from the US, folks from Jamaica, folks from Africa, different parts of Africa in our group. And as we were moving through these different spaces, it kind of hit us all the same, very similar, as well as different, as we learned about our ancestors and what they endured. And so I won't go too much in depth. I'm going to leave that to Dr. Saphronia to talk about her first impression. But I do want to just add, my second time going, we were with a larger group, and I actually opted out of going to a lot of the different spaces because I experienced it already, and things were still a little heavy for me just being in that space. The one place that I did want to go to and just have a different feeling when walking through was just the door of return, the door of no return, and then the door of return. And so that's a space that I did want to experience again, just with a different mindset and just a different perspective.
Yeah, I'll say Cape Coast is beautiful. Like Dr. Komoia said, we stayed at Lemon Tree Beach Resort, which was really good. I was impressed with the beach and the walkways that they have. They're all shells of a nut. I can't remember the name of the nut, but they're just black shells there, and it's just really pretty walking through that area. And then going down, walking on the beach, the sand area, and they have I guess you can say it's a levee, but it's a wall, a beachfront wall that you can't actually go into the water there, but you can stand on the beach, on the wall, and look down over into the ocean. So that was very interesting, seeing that. And then just seeing the rushing of the waves and just knowing that I'm on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. That was really cool. Cool and heavy in a way, because it's like, okay, our ancestors came from this side, was stolen and brought over to the other side, and the beaches just look different. The beaches are calmer on that side of the Atlantic Ocean to me. I feel the calmness in the beaches. I feel the at-homeness. I feel the connection to the water. when I go to the beaches there, and just how the water even rushes in is just different to me. So that was really cool, just experiencing that. Visiting the Cape Coast Dungeon was interesting because, of course, it's called a castle in some realms, but rightfully so, they're correcting exactly what it was. It was a dungeon, and it was a dungeon of torture. It was a dungeon that was very inhumane, and you still feel that inhumanity as you're walking through those dungeons. My first impression of the Cape Coast Dungeon was, how in the world did they build this edifice to something that is so demonstrative? And walking through those halls that are there, it was very, very heavy. The tour guide was really good in putting things into perspective. We did an episode on the Slave River, and knowing that we traveled 2.5, almost 3 hours to get from that Slave River to that Cape Coast Dungeon, is absolutely imaginable what our ancestors went through when they walked that way. There's we started off, she told us a couple of the history that was there. And most of the people that were in the Americas and the Caribbean came out of that dungeon. The Elmina dungeon was older. That was done by the Portuguese, settled by the Portuguese. And that's where most of the Central America and South America enslaved people were taken from that exit portal there. So being in the actual dungeon that our forefathers and ancestors passed through, it was a lot. It was a lot. We took pictures in the male dungeon. And it was just, they explained the flooring and how many people they put in this cell, this very dark room. And they explained how they had the school came and they excavated the feces of the people that was there, and how deep that was, and how long that dungeon was in operation. It's hard to think back on. I think when I was in the moment, I was trying not to think it and trying not to make it personal, trying to look at it as just a history lesson. And you can't really separate that DNA, that connection, that feeling of, my God, how in the world did this happen? Yeah, we went through the male dungeon, and then we came out, and there's 3 plots that are there on that property there, and they told us the story of the 3 people that were buried there. And then we saw a plaque. It was President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama visited that dungeon because her great-great-grandmother passed through that dungeon as well, and was then delivered to Charleston, South Carolina, and then was purchased and settled in a plantation in Georgia. So there's a memorial dedicated to First Lady Michelle Obama's great-grandmother in Georgia, as well. But it's one of those things that where there's so much that was lost. But it was so much courage. And we think of all of the individuals that went through that, and how many of us are descendants of that. And what a great and mighty people they are to have survived the worst of the worst. Not only survived, they came and they built countries. All of the knowledge that they had, all of the entrepreneurial spirit that we were talking about in those other episodes, they came and brought that with them, and they built these countries in the African diaspora. I'm gonna, there's so much more. There's so much more. I'm gonna let Dr. Komoia chime in on her thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's a lot more, and actually, a lot of the sentiment that Dr. Saphronia was expressing was my initial feelings and sentiment my first time visiting that space, and really feeling, once you step foot on that land in that particular area, really feeling a presence there that is super heavy. It's just a heavy presence. And they've turned it into a place where you can tour. They've turned it into a place where you can shop. They've turned it into a place where you can tap back in and learn. And I encourage everyone to go and visit. We will be showing a few pictures from our experience. And I just encourage everyone to go and visit and really learn our story. There's so much that has been lost and just kind of rewritten in a way that truly doesn't tell our story. And going back to the beginning and learning our story as much as possible. I just encourage everyone to do that and really come out with an experience and a perspective from you feeling and being there, and encourage everyone to share it with the next generation. And hopefully you can bring your family members and your friends to that place. This is a place that is not just African descendant history. This is a place that's history for almost everyone. Everybody's family in one way or another was affected by this horrific act that happened in history. And so really going back and learning this history, this piece that I'm hoping will not be lost, can only help us not repeat this horrific behavior in the future.
So much was said that I definitely want to honor this experience that we're feeling right now. I've seen documentaries about the dungeons, the door of no return. And like Dr. Saphronia said, it was a history lesson. And part of me kind of wants to separate, because it's so painful, right? But it's literally in my DNA. I can't separate out my DNA, right? And it can't separate out the traumatic experience that have passed down from generation to generation to generation to generation. So that's why I think it's so important that we embrace world history. African history is world history, because we were literally shipped to the four winds of the earth. You know, we are literally everywhere. And it's like we are connected, like Dr. Saphronia said, we're connected in ways that are traumatic, but also in ways that are, for lack of a better term, kind of like heroic, because we're still here. We are still here. All the horrendous things that people have done to us to try to annihilate us as a people, we are still here, and we are still growing and populating and multiplying and just succeeding regardless of everything, that all those little stumbling blocks that are put in our way. We're still here. Some of the things that I wanted to touch on, and there are several things, and I hope I remember all of them, because so many great things that you said that I want to just follow up on. I guess I'm going to go in the order in which you said it, as opposed to kind of like maybe chronological order, if you will. But Dr. Komoia, you spoke on the door of no return and the door of return. Can you speak a little more about what that is? Because some people may not know what that is or ever heard of those terms before.
Sure. So the door of no return was the door exiting the dungeon, and it used to be a very small door, very slim, where the enslaved people who were chained together would walk through and walk down the docks, cross the beach, down to the docks, and then board the ships. And so get on the rowboats to go out to the ships. And when you're exiting the dungeon, you see door of no return, because once you go through that door, everybody knew that you were not returning. They would never see you again. And so once, when the dungeons were shut down and I'm not sure how many years of existence that they actually flipped it. And so now when you walk through the door as a person who's going and touring that place, you walk through the door, and if you turn back, now you see the door of return, because now the door goes both ways versus just a one-way exit.
Thank you for that explanation. I hope that kind of clears it up if anyone was thinking like, what is the door of no return, the door of return? And Dr. Saphronia, you mentioned something that actually resonated so deeply with me when you said that you were standing on the shorelines and kind of looking out over the Atlantic Ocean. And how that resonated with me is because I stand out in the Gulf of Mexico, looking to the east, just nothing but water. And literally there have been times where tears would just well up in my eyes, because I would think about, like, our forebears came across these waters into the Gulf of Mexico. And I just keep going back to the fact that no matter what happened, we're here. We are living proof of, how resilient we are as a people. And so you talking about standing on the shoreline just really resonated with me. Can you speak a little more about, you mentioned the river to the dungeon. You said that it was a 3-hour drive from one to the other, or was it a 3-hour walk?
Well, no. So when we went from the Slave River, on the previous episode, we talked about the Slave River, and that was right outside of Kumasi, so in the Kumasi region. The Cape Coast region is about 3 hours away in car, 3.5 hours away in car. So it took us 3.5 hours on paved roads to get to Cape Coast. When they were capturing the indigenous people of the land, they had to walk that distance. They put chains and balls on them in the Slave River. We talked about the last bath. They went and they were scrubbed with the eucalyptus leaves, the bamboo leaves, right? They were scrubbed with the bamboo leaves, and then they were chained, and then they were walked from that place outside of the Kumasi region into Cape Coast to be enslaved in the dungeons there. So I don't know what that journey was. For a 3.5 hour drive, that's over 200 and something miles walking. So to walk that, it had to have taken at least a week in chains, tied to the next person behind you, walking in a single file line. I can't even imagine that. I mean, now we do 5Ks, we do marathons, right? 26 miles. And you know how fatigued we are after 26 miles. So imagine them walking after being beaten, scrubbed, chained from that slave river to only be put into it was probably a 6x6 dungeon that could possibly hold 40 people comfortably. But they put in 1,000 men in that dungeon with nothing. A small window at the top. So the connection, and I've said in previous episodes that water charges me, right? That my connection, my calm is water. My calm is water. And taking this trip to Ghana makes me understand why that's my calm. Because through water is where everything has happened. Trade has happened. Before the colonization and the slave trade, our ancestors went on voyages and they traded throughout the world. That's where commerce took place. That's where the gold trade went on, and the spices and everything else went through water. But then we also have to acknowledge all of the horrific things that happen in water as well. And then going to water for me connects me with all of my ancestors. I get all of that energy back from them. What was taken from them, those that made it and those that didn't make it. It recharges me with that water. So standing on that coastline, on that Atlantic side, where they were unable to say, I didn't want to go. It wasn't a choice that they made themselves. So to have that power that was coming from that rushing water out of that coastline tells me that I'm here for a reason. That we have purpose, and that energy of that water can cut through rock. That same energy that we have from that water is the same energy and drive that we have to keep going forward. So that's my connection to water. And it really became clear why I always go to water.
So powerful, so powerful. And I definitely can relate to what you said. My calm spot is water as well. You know, I've talked for years that I want to live on an island, you know, and you mentioned we definitely have to give reverence to those who didn't make it. Let's not forget about them. You know, how many lives were lost, not only on the on the continent, but on the voyage over. You know, the horrific nature of the people who put our ancestors in slavery didn't stop in Africa. You know, it continued on the voyage. It continued once we were here. It continues to this day, if we want to be honest with what's going on around us. But Komoia, I want to touch back on what you mentioned with regards to like the impact of history and how that relates to your first time going to the dungeons. And you mentioned that it was a mixed group, people from not only the continent, but also from Jamaica there, and that it kind of hit people similarly as well as differently. Can you just touch on that and kind of talk about it in relation to history?
Yeah, just in thinking about, I go back to what I was taught in school, and definitely was never taught any of this in school. And as we were in conversation within our small group, we all kind of thought about it, that we were never taught this. Our beginnings, our ancestors, what our ancestors had to go through, we were never taught this. If anything, it was maybe a little snapshot that, we all come from Africa somewhere, and now books are saying that we were invited as workers, and all of these untruths that are out there. And so in just hearing the story from our tour guide, we were just in conversation just around how can we combat our learning from a child to now, as well as how can we, moving forward, teach the next generation differently? What does that look like collectively? So coming from the US, coming from the Caribbean, coming from the continent itself, moving forward collectively, how can we combat this untruth and instill in the next generation the truth of where they come from, not only just the enslavement, but prior to the enslavement. We didn't just appear as enslaved people. And so really understanding the truth of where we come from, the shoulders we stand on the shoulders of giants. And how can we tell the story, our story of being giants and having this piece, this snapshot in our lives that's happened to our ancestors, which is where a lot of people want to stay. How do we interrupt that mindset of staying there so our bodies are no longer enslaved, some of us, but our minds? And when I talk about the history and I say that actually this event didn't only affect heavily melanated bodies or African bodies, this event affects everybody generationally. Dr. Saphronia mentioned that the Portuguese are the ones who built the Elmina slave dungeon. The British. Everybody has a part of this history, and moving forward collectively, what are we teaching the next generation so that this horrific event that affects mankind, no matter what you look like, does not reoccur? And that's beneficial to all.
Absolutely. It's only through truth that we can truly heal and move forward, because lies and secrets make you sick, and we can see very sick societies when we either choose to ignore, and when I say this, I'm talking about across the board. I don't care what you look like, melanated, unmelanated, whatever. When you choose to ignore, history, we're bound to repeat it. and we don't even realize that we're repeating it. It may look very different, but nonetheless, we're repeating because we aren't aware of history, or we choose to ignore history. So as you mentioned, Dr. Komoia, with the enslavement of bodies, looks very different in 2023 than in in 16, 1700. The heaviness that I'm feeling, that I'm experiencing right now, is deep, and I thank you both for being vulnerable and authentic in sharing your stories and how this experience has impacted you with your trip to Cape Coast. Do you have any final words before we wrap up this episode?
I would just say that everybody's going to experience it differently. I would definitely encourage everyone to make it one of those bucket list items. We have bucket lists for everything, right? But make it a bucket list item to really understand the history of the world history, and then understand your place in history.
Okay. Well, thank you, ladies, again. And thank you all for watching. And please remember to like, share, subscribe, tell a friend, and tell an enemy. Tell anyone, please, to watch this video, share it with the world. With that, I will say, remember to proceed in power.
Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to the next episode as we continue our conversation on our reflections of our trip to Ghana.
Thank you for being with us. We're sending you love, light, and positive energy. And remember to proceed